Hey guys, David here from Go5 Tech Tutorials, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make an Ubuntu proxy server. Okay, so let's get started. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to make an Ubuntu proxy server using Ubuntu server and the Squid caching proxy server. Notice that I did say caching there. So basically what this proxy server is going to do is it's going to cache or store elements in web pages that are frequently visited so that they can be loaded more quickly over the network. So if your internet connection is a bit slow and you'd like to speed it up a bit, accessing the web on your network through this proxy server might help because it'll store elements on frequently visited web pages, allowing them to be loaded much more quickly. This proxy server can also be used to get around web blocks on external networks as long as you forward the port of the proxy server in your router. You can then access this proxy server outside of your network and use it to get around some web blocks. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to actually install Ubuntu server. Now here I'm using Ubuntu server 14.04.1, however the steps are the same on any version. You're going to want to go ahead and download the ISO image, which I'll leave a link in the description below, and you're going to want to burn that ISO image to some sort of media, and then boot up that ISO on your server. Once you get to this screen here, just select Install Ubuntu server, and it'll go ahead and load the installation. So select your language, select your country, territory, or area. It's going to ask if you want it to detect your keyboard layout. If you already know what it is, you can just hit no, but if you don't, you can hit yes. I'm using an English US keyboard, and it's going to start loading up some of the stuff that it needs to continue with the installation. Okay, now it's going to ask you for a hostname for this server. Your hostname is basically the name by which other computers can identify this server. So for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm just going to be typing in Ubuntu server, but you can type whatever you want. I'm going to hit continue, and it's going to ask you to create a new user. So the full name, username, and password. Okay, now it's going to ask you if you want to encrypt your home directory. If this server is going to be storing crucial information in the home directory, I recommend hitting yes here. However, for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm just going to hit no. It's going to ask you if your time zone is correct, and in my case that is not, so I'm just going to select the correct time zone. And now we need to set up our partitions. I'm going to be showing you how to do this, but if you're not comfortable with manually editing partitions, you can just select guided, use entire disk, and set up LVM, or just guided use entire disk. I don't recommend doing encrypted LVM because if your server ever was to go down, that can be pretty hard to recover. So I'm just going to show you how to create the partitions manually, so I'm just going to select manual. And this is where a lot of people will disagree with me. Some people like to have multiple partitions for multiple things, such as a home partition, a temporary partition, and a root partition. However, I think it's ideal to just have one swap partition and one root partition that stores all of your files. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. So I'm just going to select my disk here. We need to create a new empty partition table. And I'm just going to create the swap partition first so that we can use the remaining space for our root partition. So I'm just going to create a new partition. I'm going to make the swap partition 2 GB. That's going to be a primary partition. And I'm just going to put that at the end of the available space. We're going to use it as swap. I'm going to hit done setting up the partition. And now the rest of the space, I'm just going to create a new partition. Again, a primary partition using the ext4 journaling file system. We're going to mount it as root. And I'm going to turn the bootable flag to on just in case we want to install the bootloader to that drive. I'm just going to hit done setting up the partition. And that's good there. So I'm just going to hit finish partitioning and write changes to disk. Hit yes, and it's going to go ahead and actually start installing the system itself. If you need to access the web through an HTTP proxy, you can enter one in here. However, I'm assuming if you're creating this server, you don't already have one, so I'm just going to hit continue without entering anything. And it's going to start downloading some files that it needs. When you get to this screen here, I recommend installing security updates automatically, but if you know what you're doing, you can select no automatic updates or manage system with landscape. So it's going to start actually installing the software. When you get to this screen here, I'm just going to leave everything blank for now so that we can download the most recent version of the software from the repos later. However, I'm just going to go ahead and install OpenSSH server for now, just in case we want to manage the server remotely. So leaving everything else blank, I'm just going to hit continue. And now it might take a little while to actually install all the software, so just be patient. Okay, when you get to actually installing the bootloader, it's going to ask if you want to install it to the master boot record. I only recommend hitting yes if Ubuntu server is the only operating system on that computer. If it's not, I recommend recommend hitting no, and it'll install it to the root partition. However, in my case, it's the only operating system on this computer, so I'm just going to hit yes, and it's going to go ahead and finish the installation. So it's going to ask you to remove the installation media and just hit continue, and it'll restart into the OS itself. Okay, so once it's rebooted, you can just type in your username and password that you created earlier, and the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a root password so that we don't need to type in sudo in front of every command. We can just type in su once, it'll log us in as root, and we can just run all the commands that way. It just makes things a lot less tedious. So in order to create the root password, I'm just going to type in sudo space passwd space root, hit enter. It's going to ask for your sudo password, so that's just your password, and a new root password, so I'm just going to type that in. And it should tell you that the password has been updated successfully. And there you go, you've also just successfully installed Ubuntu Server. Okay, so now let's actually get into setting up the server. A server should always have a static IP address. This just allows you to avoid confusion about not knowing the server's IP address if it gets a new DHCP lease from the router. Before we do anything though, I want to log in as root, so I'm just going to type in su, hit enter, and type in the root password that we just created. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and fetch the current network configuration, so I'm just going to type in ifconfig, hit enter, and you can see here that I'm connected on the network through the interface eth0. So for now, you're just going to want to take note of your IP address. So in my case, that is 192.168.1.6. Your bcast number, so in my case, 192.168.1.255, and your subnet mask, so in my case, 255.255.255.0. So now we're just going to actually set up the static IP address, and to do that, we need to edit the interfaces file, so I'm just going to be using the VI editor. So I'm going to type in vi space /etc/network/interfaces. I'm going to go all the way down to where it says eth0 inet DHCP, hit insert on my keyboard, and I'm going to change that DHCP to static. Hit enter space, address, space, and you can type in an IP address here. I'm just going to be using the same one that was given to me via DHCP just because I know it's not being used already. I'm going to hit enter space net mask, so my subnet mask, so in my case that was 255.255.255.0. Hit enter space network space 192.168. The second last set of digits in your bcast number, so in my case that was a 1.0. Enter space broadcast space your broadcast number or bcast number. Enter space gateway space the IP address of your router. Common router IP addresses are 192.168.0.1, 192.168.1.1, and 192.168.2.1. It's almost always the exact same number as your network number, so in my case 192.168.1, except the last digit, instead of being 0, it's 1. So basically your gateway is just your subnet.1. Hit enter space DNS-name servers space your IP address for your router again, space, and we're just going to use Google DNS as a backup, so 8.8.8.8. Once you're happy with the way that's configured, you can just hit escape on your keyboard, type in :WQ to write and quit, hit enter, and I'm just going to go ahead and reboot the server since that's the easiest and most reliable way to restart the networking services. Okay, I've restarted the server. I'm just going to log in as root again, so su. And the first thing that we're going to do before we do anything else is just update the repositories. So to do that, just type in apt-get space update. And it should go ahead and download all the new repository information. Also, if this is successful, you also know that you've configured your static IP address correctly. Once we've updated the repos, we're going to actually perform an update on the system. So to do that, type in apt-get space upgrade. And this will just upgrade all the packages on the system to the most recent version. This part can take a while depending on how much it needs to download, so just be patient. Okay, so once our system has been updated, we're actually going to go ahead and install the Squid proxy server. So to do that, just type in apt-get space install space squid. Hit enter, type Y for yes. Hit enter, and that has successfully been installed. So now we actually need to configure the Squid proxy server. In order to do that, we need to edit the Squid configuration file. If you've watched my other tutorials, you know that I normally like to do this with the VI editor. However, the Squid configuration file is somewhere around 4,000 lines. So using the VI editor, which doesn't have a search option to my knowledge, really isn't practical. So to edit the Squid configuration file, I'm going to be using the nano editor. So to do that, type in nano space /etc/squid3 /squid.conf. Hit enter, and here is the Squid configuration file. Now the very first thing that I'm going to talk about is the visible hostname. So in order to find that definition, I'm just going to hit Control W on my keyboard to bring up the search box, and I'm going to type in visible_hostname. Hit enter, and the first time you hit enter, it just brings you to this section here. And the reason I'm bringing you to this section here is I just like to create it under the section explaining what it is, just so things stay organized. So I'm just going to create a new line, type in visible_hostname, space, and then I'm just going to name this Goguda Proxy. Basically, your visible hostname is just basically the name of your proxy server. So if you're accessing the web through the proxy and the proxy can't fetch the web page, on the Squid error page that'll come up, it'll just say something like generated by Goguda Proxy or something like that. So it doesn't need to be the same name as the hostname of your server, it can be anything you want. Like I've done here, named it Goguda Proxy. The second thing I'm going to talk about is the cache manager. The cache manager is also an email address that shows up on the error page. If there's an error on the error page, it says you can contact your administrator at, and then there's an email. Now by default, the email doesn't really show anything, it's completely useless. So I'm just gonna go ahead and define an email. So to find that line again, Control W, CACHE_MGR. It's not the first one, so I'm just gonna hit Control W again, hit enter, and I'll just define it right under the cache manager tag. So I'm just going to type in CACHE_MGR space, and then an email address at which the clients can send an email if something goes wrong. So I'm just going to type in my email there. So now I'm going to look for HTTP_port, and it took me a minute to find it by hitting Control W and hitting enter again, so that I'm brought to the next HTTP port entry in the configuration file. But I eventually found it. So by default, Squid listens to port 3128, but some people like to change this to something else, such as 8888, or whatever you want. I'm just gonna leave this at port 3128 for the purpose of this tutorial. If you wanted to listen to more than one port, you can also just hit space here and type in another port. So let's say I wanted it to listen on port 3128 and 8888. I can just type it in like that, and it'll listen on both ports. Now I need to find the ACL section, so this is basically where everything is defined. Okay, now here's the ACL section. Now it did take me quite a while to find it, so to find it more quickly, just type in Control W and then type in something like ACL space localnet space src space 10.0.0.0, and it should bring you to this part right here. Now, I like to think of an ACL as sort of like a variable. An ACL basically stores information which we can access later when we are defining under what conditions the proxy server can actually take a request. So to create a new ACL, just type in ACL space, name it. So I'm just going to type in network, so the name of your ACL, space, and then the type of your ACL. So in this case, we are going to be adding a new set of IP addresses that are going to be allowed to connect to the proxy server, and I believe SRC stands for source, so just define the type of ACL there. I'm saying define the type because there can be several types of ACL. For example, you can also set up the proxy server so that it will only listen at certain times and on certain days. I'm going to be showing you an example of the time ACL in just a second. To get a list of all the types of ACLs that you can have, take a look at the Squid documentation. So I have SRC typed in there, I'm going to hit space, and I'm just going to type in my network subnet. So that's 192.168.1.0. It's easiest to think of the 0 that you type in here as an empty space. So basically, if we were to use this ACL later when we're defining what can and what can't connect to the proxy server, we're basically saying anything that starts with the IP address 192.168.1. some sort of number can connect to the proxy server. If we also change this to 0, basically what we're saying is anything that starts with 192.168.a number can connect to the proxy server. And again, if we change this to 0, we're saying any client with an IP address of 192.some number can connect to the server. Now, my network only has clients with IP addresses starting with 192.168.1.0 on them, so I'm just going to leave it like that. After the IP address, you're just going to want to type in / and then your subnet mask in bytes. So my subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. So in bytes, that is 24 bytes. Now, you probably don't know your subnet mask in bytes off the top of your head. So what you can do is you could go to this IP address calculator, which I'll leave a link to in the description below. And all you have to do is select your subnet mask from the list here. So in my case, 255.255.255.0, and it'll automatically update to show your subnet mask in bytes. So you can see here that mine is 24, and that's what I entered in the Squid configuration file. Okay, so I'm happy with that ACL variable we just created, so I'm just going to hit enter. And now I'll just show you one more example of something else you could do with ACLs. So I'm just going to type in ACL to declare the new variable. Okay, so now I'm just going to type in a name for the new variable, so I'll just name it hours. hit space. This is a time variable, so time, space. And now the days of the week are each represented by a letter, so I'm just going to type in Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, space, and then the times between which people will be allowed to access the server. Now this is in 24-hour time, so I'm just going to type in 2 o'clock, so that's 2 a.m., 20 o'clock, that is 8 p.m., and that should be good. So basically what we're saying there is if we use the variable called hours later, wherever this is used, they'll be able to access the server all 7 days throughout the week between 2 a.m. and 8 p.m. The source and the time types of ACLs are just two of the various types of variables that you can have here. I've shown you how to define and name the variables, and I'm also about to show you how to use them. However, if you're interested in learning about the other types of variables as well, check out the Squid documentation. I've shown you how to implement them. All you need to do is practice using them. Anyway, so once you've created all your variables up there, you need to scroll down a bit to where it says HTTP access. And I'm just going to start defining this at HTTP access allow localhost. Hit enter. And this is basically where you are going to be declaring who can access the server. And we're going to be doing that using the ACL variables that we just created earlier above. So to create a new definition, just type in HTTP underscore access space allow, or you can also type in deny if you want to deny these variables, space, and we're going to define what to allow by using the ACL variables that we created earlier. So I'm just going to type in network space hours. So basically what we're saying here is to allow any request that the server gets from the network 192.168.1.0/24 between the hours that we specified above. So the general rule for defining one of these rules here is to type in HTTP access, allow or deny, and then the names of the variables of your ACLs that we created earlier. If you're feeling brave and you want to allow all access to the proxy server. So for example, if you're somewhere else or you just want to be able to access your proxy throughout the whole world, all you'd have to do is type in HTTP access allow all. And this would allow all incoming traffic on the server. Now by default, Squid actually isn't set up to start caching. So that's what we're going to enable now, is we're going to enable the caching feature of Squid. So our proxy would work right now, but it wouldn't cache. So in order to set that up, I'm just going to search for cache underscore dir space UFS, and you want to look for this line here, so cache underscore dir UFS slash var slash spool slash squid3. We're going to uncomment that, and this is where it's going to cache, as in slash var slash spool slash squid3. You can change this directory to whatever directory you want if you'd like. This 100 here is the cache size in megabytes. So by default, it's set to cache up to 100 megabytes, and then to start deleting the old cache stuff to make room for newer caches. Now you can change this number to fit your hard drive. I recommend only using about 10%, and at the very max 15% of your hard drive for cache storage. If you use any more than that, you might run into problems and it'll just slow your server down. So in my case, I'm doing this in VirtualBox with a 50 gigabyte hard drive. 10% of 50 is 5, so I'm going to make the cache size 5 gigs. And like I said here, this is in megabytes, so 1 gigabyte is 1024 megabytes. So 1024 times 5 is equal to 5120. So I'm just going to type in 5120. So this will allow the cache size to be up to 5 gigs. Now if you just leave it at this, you might run into some problems with some images on some websites being cached and then not updating after they've been cached. So you might be seeing old images. So in order to fix that, we can just add a line here that will basically just refresh the images a bit more often so that we're not left seeing old images on web pages when we're browsing through the proxy. So this line here, just type in refresh underscore pattern space dash I space slash the opposite way than we normally use, dot bracket, and now the image type, so GIF, make a straight line, PNG, line, JPG, line, JPEG, line, ICO, close the bracket, $, space, 3600, hit tab, 90%, hit tab again, 43200. And that line there will just fetch the pictures a bit more often on the web pages so you're not left seeing old images. Okay, so that's your basic Squid configuration file. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit Control O to write, hit Control X to exit. And if you left the caching directory the same at /var /spool /squid3, you don't need to do this step. However, if you made it your own directory, you're going to need to go ahead and create that directory if you haven't already. And you're just going to need to stop the Squid service, so service space squid3 space stop. And once it's stopped, you need to create the cache directory file system in the folder. So in order to create that in the folder you defined in the Squid configuration file, just type in squid3 -z and hit enter, and it'll go ahead and create the file system. Now if it gets stuck here, just hit enter, and that's fine. And now you're just going to want to start Squid, so type in service space squid3 space start. And it should start up just fine. Now to make sure that the Squid proxy server is caching and that the file system has been set up correctly, just type in du space -sh space / and then the directory of your cache, so in my case var /spool /squid3. Now it should be about 17 megabytes before you've done any web browsing, and to make sure that it is caching, once you've done a bit of web browsing, come back, run that command again, and if the number is bigger than 17 megabytes, so if you can see that it is getting bigger, you know that it is caching correctly. So right now our Squid3 proxy server is up and running, so now I'm going to show you how to actually connect to it. Okay, so connecting to the proxy server is pretty much the same in any OS or any device. You basically have to type in the IP address of the server along with the port and you should be connected. I'm just going to show you on my Mac here, so I'm just going to open up System Preferences and I'm going to go into Network. I'm on a wired connection, so this is my connection here. I'm just going to hit Advanced, Proxies, and you can see here that we have the option for a web proxy, a secure web proxy, an FTP proxy, and we have a whole bunch of other proxy options here. Now, Squid is capable of doing a lot of internet protocols. However, the most common ones are HTTP and HTTPS. But like I just said, it's also capable of doing several others, such as FTP. So I'm also going to route my FTP services through the proxy server here. So to configure your proxy server, just type in the IP address of the server itself, so .1.6, and the port that you defined in the configuration file. So in my case, that was 3128. I just left it at the default. And I'm also going to do that for all the other protocols here that I want to route through the proxy. You can leave authentication off because I haven't showed you how to set up authentication. I'm not going to show you how to do that in this video because there can be several options. You can use SMB, you can use just a plain text file to store the username and password. There are just so many options that it wouldn't be practical for me to show you how to do that in this video. There are a lot of great resources online that'll show you how to do that. So once you've gone ahead and typed in the IP address for your proxy, just hit OK, and I'm just going to apply that. Like I said, the setup is pretty much the same on any operating system or on any device. On Windows, you'll find it under Internet Options, and on most other OSs, including mobile devices, you'll find it under the actual networking interfaces settings. If you go into your web browser and you look under the settings page, you'll also most likely find a proxy section, which will allow you to open up either the system's proxy setup or the web browser's own proxy setup. Okay, so now all of our stuff should be being routed through the proxy server, so I'm just going to go ahead and open up a web browser. And the best test in order to see if it's working is just to type in the IP address of the server itself because it's not going to let you connect to that. So just type in 192.168.1.6 and you can see we are given the Squid error page here. You can see here's the visible hostname that we created. It was generated by Guguda Proxy, and the cache administrator, you can see we have my email address here. So if you get this web page, when you type in the IP address of your server, you know that everything is being routed through the proxy. I'm also going to try typing in a non-existent web address here just to make sure. And it took a second, but you can see here that instead of just showing a simple cannot connect to web page, it also shows the Squid proxy server error message. If you want to access your proxy server from outside of your home network, you can edit the configuration file to do that, and you'll also have to forward port 3128 or whichever port you are using. You're going to have to forward that in your router to your server's IP address. I have a video on port forwarding, which I'll also leave a link to in the description below if you're interested in doing that. So again, you'll want to forward port 3128 or whichever port you specified in the configuration file, and you're going to want to forward both TCP and UDP requests. So anyways, that's it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching, and I hope I helped. If you like this video, don't forget to click the like button down below. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe for more, and also don't forget to check out my Facebook and Twitter page. Also don't forget to check out my website at www.guguda55techtutorials.com. All the links are in the description below.